Welcome to our videos on building instructional coherence, or BIC. In this video, we're just going to do a quick overview of all of the components of BIC, and in subsequent videos, we will go into detail about each one of those components. Let's start off with this quote. I'm going to give you a moment to read it. I like this quote because I believe it deeply to be true. The thing that makes the difference in our classrooms is us. We want to be really good at our job because we know that we are the difference maker for our students. You can have great curriculum, you can have great materials, but the truth of the matter is, the most important factor affecting student achievement, it's you and me. So we know our job is really important, but let's think for a minute about why. Why is this job so important? Well, I want you to think about an average student, a student that's working at the 50th percentile, and we're going to give them 2 years in a row of highly ineffective teaching. That student, their performance will drop to the 3rd percentile. We're going to take that same student at the 50th percentile, give them 2 years in a row of highly effective teaching, that same student's performance will rise to the 96th percentile. That's really dramatic, and it really brings home the absolute importance of our profession and why what we do in the classroom on a day-to-day basis makes such a difference. So, what are these highly effective teachers doing in their classrooms? We want to know what these strategies are so that we can replicate them for our classroom. Well, first of all, we know that schools with a lot of success have a shared instructional model. In our case, we're calling it the core instructional model. The reason we want to use one instructional model across the board is because it makes it easier for all of our teachers to be speaking the same language. We're using a common vocabulary, and we can help each other out with ideas and various resources. It makes it easier for our administrators to be effective instructional leaders because everyone is being held to the same standards. And for our students, it's going to create a predictable structure from class to class and from year to year. So what is it? What is the core instructional model? Well, it's research-based and it's time-tested. And it maximizes academic learning time and builds student independence and competence, which is, of course, what we're going for. What do we mean by academic learning time? Well, there are 3 components of academic learning time, or what we call ALT, and this applies no matter what grade you're teaching and no matter what content area you teach in. The first piece is that students need to know and understand the objective. We know that students will learn at a deeper level when they know what it is they're going to be learning and they understand what those objectives are. The second piece is that students need to actively manipulate the content in relation to that lesson objective. This is where the students are doing the work. This is where the students are taking that objective and digging down deep to really understand it. And the third piece is that as they manipulate that content, they are being successful and they are experiencing that success at a 75 to 95% rate. When all 3 of these pieces are in place, we have deep learning. If we're missing one of these elements, we do not have deep learning. In other words, if my students are manipulating the content and they're being successful, but they didn't know the purpose of what they were doing, we don't get long-term success. At the same time, if my students know and understand the objective and they're actively manipulating the content, but they're not being successful at least 75 to 95% of the time, we don't have long-term success. We need all 3 of these to be in place every lesson, every day. How do we make that happen? Well, one way is that we can plan our lessons using what we call the core instructional model. Here you see the pieces of the core instructional model laid out for you. ARK, that stands for Activating Relevant Knowledge, and we're going to do that at the beginning of every single lesson. TIP, this stands for teacher input. This is the teaching time of the lesson, and SAP is student active participation. These two pieces are going to flow back and forth. There usually isn't just the teacher time and just the student time. These are very liquid. But as you can see, student active participation is the biggest chunk of the lesson. Finally, ISS stands for Identifying Student Success. We're going to wrap up every single one of our lessons with an ISS just so we know and the students know what they got out of that lesson. 100% of the time, we are going to be monitoring and adjusting. While we want every single one of these pieces to be in place in every lesson, we are also going to be looking at our students to guide whether or not this lesson is working effectively, and we monitor and adjust to make it happen. This is something we call the core instructional model thinking frame. These are simply questions that you can ask yourself about each piece of the core instructional model when you are planning a lesson. When you want to plan your ARK, you can ask yourself these questions as a jumping off point. Same thing with teacher input, student active participation, and the ISS. We'll be coming back to this thinking frame quite often. Here you can see the core instructional model put into a lesson planning template. You can see all of our pieces there, ARK, TIP, and SAP, or what we call Me, We, To, You, the gradual release, and wrapping everything up with an ISS. So let's focus on that ARK and the ISS for just a moment. ARK and ISS are the bookends of our learning. They are going to start and end every lesson. This requires planning because all too often we get into our lesson and then we realize, oops, I forgot to activate their relevant knowledge, or oops, the bell just rang, it's time for my students to go and I didn't have time to identify their success. So we have to plan for these pieces. They are what's going to hold up all of the rest of the learning. There in the middle, we have teacher input and student active participation, or what we call the Me, We, To, You, or it's sometimes called the I do, we do, to do, you do. It's that gradual release of responsibility there in the middle of the lesson, always being held up with activating relevant knowledge and identifying student success. So let's talk about those pieces in the middle for just a moment. What do we mean by gradual release of responsibility, the Me, We, To, You? Well, we're comparing our gradual release of responsibility to a dance class. At the beginning of every lesson, I want you to think of the me as the time when all of the students in the dance class are simply watching the instructor. The dance instructor is showing the students, this is an exemplary performance. This is an example of what I want you to be doing. She's not asking for input from her students. She's simply saying, eyes on me, let me show you what it looks like to be successful with this dance. After the students have watched the instructor model, now it's time to try it out themselves. Everybody do it with me. So the teacher may say, watch me in the mirror, but everybody is going to do it along with me. The instructor is moving around, making some adjustments, monitoring and adjusting, but we are all doing it together. The next level of the gradual release of responsibility is 2. Let's partner up. I want to see you guys do this together. The instructor is still very much pleasant. She's moving around the room, making adjustments, and watching as these partners work through the dance. And the final stage of gradual release is you. This is when the student is on stage at the recital. They know they're going to be successful. The instructor is waiting in the wings. They're not on stage. This is the student's time to shine because they've had all of the preparation they need to be successful. Here on the screen, you have a quote about the gradual release of responsibility. I'm going to give you a moment to read this quote. So yes, we start off as teachers. We have all the responsibility, but by the end, the students have all the responsibility. So let's look at academic learning time and how it relates to the core instructional model. We start academic learning time with students know and understand the objective. Well, how does that relate to the core instructional model? This is when the teacher is going to activate relevant knowledge and state and review the objective. Then the students actively manipulate the content. What does that look like in the core instructional model? This is our TIP and SAP, the teacher input and the student active participation, the me, we, to, and you. And the final piece of academic learning time is that students experience success during that active manipulation. This in the core instructional model, this is our ISS, when we identify student success. In our subsequent videos, we will be going into great detail about what each one of those pieces entails. I want you to know that this applies in all grade levels, all content areas, no matter what you are teaching. Academic learning time and the core instructional model are two pieces that you can use to make sure your students are going to be successful. Next up, you're going to watch the video on activating relevant knowledge. So thank you for your time.